Panton. I'm a senior at RBS, majoring in business analytics and IT with a minor in health administration. I've also been interning here at CWIB for the past 3 years, and I'm also a member of the Women Builder program at RBS. I'd like to thank you guys all for attending the fourth and final panel on Manospheres and Tradwives, how to online gender narratives shape workplace equity. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our incredible moderator and panelists. Jenny Glazer, CEO at Coquel, a global think tank helping companies redesign how they work and lead, is moderating this panel. With over 25 years of experience, she has led transformations across Fortune 500s and nonprofits and is a certified expert in team effectiveness and agile leadership. Now let's meet our panelists. Tavisha Gupta is a director of research, evaluation, and learning at Equimundo. She is a globally recognized expert in gender equity, masculinities research, and the transformative power of care. And her recent research addresses the impact of Manosphere on young men's attitudes toward gender equality and rising isolation experienced by men across generations. Her scholarly work has been cited more than 1,600 times and has been featured in several media outlets like The Guardian and NPR. Next, we have Kate Mangino, a Rutgers Center for Women in Business Research Fellow. Kate is the author of Equal Partners, Improving Gender Equality at Home, which addresses the social norms that underpin household gender inequality and has done extensive work on the role genders plays in home and work. Her work has been featured in Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, CNN, and The Guardian. And lastly, we have Rebecca Stotzner online. She is a professor of social work for the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She has recently begun exploring potential harmful, dare we say toxic, gendered spaces on the internet, particularly those created by women, including tradwife communities and feminine coaches. Her work has been widely published in prominent peer-reviewed journals. I'm particularly excited about this because this is a topic not addressed in classrooms. And so I'm excited for you all to hear this panel today. And I'm going to hand it over to Jenny.
Hello, everyone. I was extremely excited to be asked for this topic. First of all, my background is being in workplaces. And so I kind of took the red pill in the matrix to understand what is happening in this world and how does it impact the workplace? So this is absolutely fascinating. And if we connect the dots from the day, we started with where do perceptions come from? How are they embedded? That was Tina. That was brilliant. Then we had algorithmic bias in tech and community. And then we just heard about what about that 80%? Not involved. And so all of that comes full circle today. And before I put the panel in the hot seat, we're going to play a game. Are you in? This is inspired by NPR. I am a nerd, and it's from This, That, or the Other. And so I'm going to read quotes, and then I'll ask you to tell me, is this a quote from a tradwife, a Taylor Swift song lyric, or a line from Star Trek? Are you ready? Okay, first line, and then I'll name what it is. Show of hands. Customs tell us who we are and where we come from. Is that a tradwife? Show of hands. Okay, sure. Is it a Taylor Swift lyric? Or is it a line from Star Trek? Hands up. Thank you, nerds. I love this. You are my people. Okay, we have two more. Are you with me? And by the way, it's the end of the day, so this is our panel. We're going to have the best time. Lisa knew what she was getting. So, okay, next. Home isn't a place. It's a way of remembering. Is that a tradwife? Show of hands. A Taylor Swift lyric, or is that a line from Star Trek? Wrong, that was a tradwife blog. It's hard, harder than you think. And then last one, I think you know, this is the golden age of something good and real and right. That is our there was a lyric or a headline I saw in the Washington Post, Taylor Swift, is she a trad wife, right? So that was deliberated. And then before I get into questions, again, this topic is the gift that keeps on giving. The trad son We're going to get into that. That was in the New York Post. And then my favorite was Martha Stewart, who called herself the original OTW, the original trad wife, but more organized. So thank you, Martha. We got to judge the trad wives too. So enough about me, and thank you for playing my game. I want to hear from Becky. Can you define for us what is this thing called a trad wife?
Sure, it's more complex as you just demonstrated than it looks on its surface. Originally, Tradwives emerged actually in the UK. That there was a woman who showed up on a television show, and at that time there was a lot of concern about Tradwives being this sort of kinder, gentler way of recruiting women into white nationalism or white extremism. But then, it stayed sort of under the most people's radars until 2020, actually, when TikTok exploded. We all, because of the pandemic, were forced back into our homes. We know that was pretty disastrous for women in terms of work. And at that time, all of us were doing our sourdough starters and things like that. There was this renewed interest in domesticity and domestic tasks. Or domestic tasks, and that's where we really see this explosion of sort of commodified tradwives. So folks who maybe aren't living a tradwife lifestyle themselves, but are promoting them or selling them online. So one of the most famous is Nara Smith, who's a South African model who wears like couture while she is making her sourdough starters and things like that. But there's also been these deep connections still to conservative ideologies, red pill ideologies that are of concern to folks. And then we're seeing this kind of like now third wave or sort of third group of interest, which we sort of jokingly behind the scenes have been calling like the everyday tradwives. So you have the tradwives who are sort of selling the tradwife lifestyle, and then you have everyday folks who are adopting it or starting to model some of their lifestyle after what's being sold to them in some ways. So it's really hard to define, a very clear set of criteria around what is a current tradwife. It does have more than just a stay-at-home mom model. There's often ties to biblical womanhood or ideas of submission where the man is the leader of the family and the wife is the helpmeet or the assistant to the husband. There's a lot of emphasis on sort of pre-modern gender roles about like some of them talk about pink jobs versus blue jobs in their households, like the jobs that the woman does, the jobs that the man does. But a strong emphasis on a woman's value being in her domestic labor, not being a wage earner. So I hope that gets us started and we can unpack more as we go along.
Me too, because when we think about the workplaces, knowing that this is in the universe and an undercurrent and a movement and an algorithm really helps us think about how it might be showing up for us day to day. Tavishi, can you, Manosphere, I'm still getting my head around. Can you help us understand that more?
Of course, and I think the word manosphere has increasingly become part of public discourse and mainstream media. And so I'll just sort of define it, but I will complicate it also.
Yes, please.
That's what we do as researchers. So the manosphere is a shorthand for sort of this online ecosystem of male-dominated spaces, and it is most often associated with misogyny and anti-feminist movements, right? And so when the scholarly work started, this was in 2013, the Debbie Ging was one of the first ones. She identified some key communities that define the manosphere. So one of them is incels, right? The involuntary celibates, who essentially say their philosophy is that men have a right to sex and that if they don't get it, women should be blamed for it. The other ones are the MRAs, the men's rights advocates, right? And they're the ones who say the society is biased against men. The other group is men going their own way. And this kind of subcommunity says avoid relationships with women entirely. There's another one that's called pickup artists, which basically influence men to use very coercive sexual techniques to get what they want. And the last one are these like fathers' rights groups that mostly talk about custody and fathers' rights issues, divorce issues. Now, this is quite fragmented, yet there's an underlying ideological structure, which already Becky and Jenny talked about, which is the red pill philosophy. What is this red pill philosophy? It came from the Matrix, for sure. You take the red pill or the blue pill. The red pill basically says that the society is doing wrong to men and that traditional gender norms are kind of undermined because of feminism. The other piece of this is also that there's a biological, like sort of, predeterminism built in. Male dominance is an innate biological predisposition. It's part of their kind of biological right. That's how traditionally the manosphere has been defined. What has happened over the past few years, many years, especially during COVID and after, is that a lot of this kind of conversation that was in the fringe has now kind of integrated into the mainstream online spaces, right? And so it's very hard to actually distinguish between the content that used to be in this extremist manosphere space and now the kind of benign male interest spaces. What are the harmful subcultures versus where are men online for fitness videos, right? It's very hard to kind of distinguish between that. That makes the study of this even more difficult. We cannot simply easily classify what's the manosphere and what's not. And our research that we've been doing globally is already kind of finding the cracks in this. We did a digital scraping of Twitch, Discord, YouTube, and we did like an AI analysis of it. And what we found was that there's actually additional kind of male identity ideals being performed. The geek masculinity, the dad masculinity, the maker masculinity, the sports masculinity. And then we also asked individual men, well, why are you online? What are the reasons for it? 94% of men, we surveyed US men, 1,900 of them, 94% there, I'm just online to have fun and for entertainment. 80% are actually online for community. 63% are online to get advice. And I think there's like a 61%. 63% are, 75% are saying, I just want to be understood. I want to be in a space where I'm understood. So I'll discuss the complexities and nuances more, but really the term manosphere has now evolved into something so much more loosely connected sort of spaces. And really the definition of what manosphere was 15 years ago doesn't really hold true anymore. So it's important for us to understand the ever-evolving nature of that as we think about who are the young men who are entering our workspaces today.
Beautiful. And speaking of young men, Kate, what is this thing called a trad son again?
Have you all heard of this? Now there are.
Oh, it's so good.
Sons.
Yeah.
This is the newest one. I only started hearing about it over the summer. So we're like 6 months into trad sons. By definition, they are out of work sons who are past school age, who instead of having a job are staying home with their parents and exchange for food and free rent are doing all the housework and cleaning. So it's kind of an interesting, it's obviously that the name came in because of the conversation around Tradwives. A lot of people are saying no one is really becoming a trad son because of hashtag trad son. These young men were already going to be doing this, and the name is just sort of a point of empowerment. It also is reflective of a downward economy. A lot of these young men can't find jobs. And we all know that there's a lot of shame in being unemployed with men, not being able to provide. And so becoming a trad son is a way to alleviate a little bit of that shame. So I don't know how long it's going to stick around, but I think it's an interesting counterpoint to the Tradwives movement.
I absolutely would love to have a trad son, honestly. Look, so these ideas, when I first started thinking about it, seemed like they are so far removed from my corporate work life. And I actually think that we need to go a little deeper to think about how they're influencing what people are consuming, which impacts how they think about leadership, ambition, and care every single day. That's the so what. So, Kate, in your work on caregiving and gender norms, how do traditional roles shape the way organizations perceive ambition, leadership, and family responsibility?
Jenny, I thought we only had an hour. I'm going to try to summarize this. So I want to start by saying that I don't think we can think about this in just terms of work. We don't work In a vacuum, our work lives and our personal lives are interwoven. And what we do at home and what we have responsibility for at home directly impacts how we show up at work. Saying that, I think at the core, what Tradwives and the Manosphere are drawing on is this very old norm that I would bet no one in this room believes in, but that is that women are caregivers and men are breadwinners. And somewhere in the fabric of our culture, that still exists. And it still pulls at our heartstrings. I had a conversation with someone earlier, she's actually left, but she was telling me that her husband is staying home right now and taking care of the household, and how he's always pulled into this, am I making the right decision? Am I doing enough? Am I letting you down? Am I letting the family down? It's because of that norm showing up. It's like this little Tradwife on his shoulder asking these questions. And I think it's the same thing. It's the reason why this morning on my way here, I was checking my kids' bubbles to make sure they got to school on time. Because every time I choose work over home, I have that Tradwife on my shoulder that's pulling me. And I think what happens is when we see it in pop culture, when we see it on Instagram reels as we're scrolling before bed or on the train on the way to work, it pulls at that norm even more tightly. And I think it shows up in our workplaces every day. The double bind was mentioned earlier today. It shows up in that way. It shows up when men turn down their paternity leave entitlement because they feel like they need to be a breadwinner. It shows up every day in little ways, and what we have to do is start noticing how it's showing up.
So we're the 5-generational workforce. We've got young men coming into the workforce. Tavishi, how do you think the manosphere narratives are influencing young men's attitudes towards gender equality and caregiving as they enter the workforce? Are you seeing any patterns in the data?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, so I'm a nuance kind of girl. And so I'm definitely going to nuance this one too. But obviously, look, the more you're in your echo chamber and consuming a certain type of ideology, you're sort of going to start thinking already that, well, this is probably how it should be. This is how we should think about it. We should see women in a certain way. We should see men in a certain way. And there are studies that show that link, right? The more they consume some of the manosphere content, they're going to start adhering and endorsing more of those very traditional, very conservative, sometimes extremist views. Two things to note here. One is the mainstream media makes it sound like when men consume manosphere content, they are passive recipients of those messages. And they're just sitting and watching and they're sort of absorbing and flip it around. They've now become a misogynist, violent man. But actually, when we speak to young men, what we're getting is that they are in this kind of identity navigation of this digital ecosystem, right? They're critiquing it. They are internalizing it. They are resisting it. It's sort of this push and pull of trying to understand and say, I know there's an algorithmic amplification happening here. I know something about this influencer is not right. But I can also understand why some of it makes sense to me. So this is a constant online kind of narrative that they're imbibing. The other thing around offline sort of spaces that we're looking at and we find constantly is men's investment and desire to be carers, right? And I think that it sounds so counterintuitive because we have a data point that actually says that in the US, 86% of the men, the 1,900 men sample, picked provider as being the main trait of manhood, right? But we have yet to come across a man who says, I don't want to bond with my child. I don't want to be a good father. I don't want my child to grow up and have a relationship with me. It has never come across in our data. And we do data and research globally, right? So when you have these kind of juxtapositioning of these online and offline kind of spaces, it is a lot for any human being to have to navigate. And so we have to see them as active agents of like making their own realities. So they're not certainly passively taking this in. The other thing that's really important is that the only thing that we hear about the manosphere is that it's a misogynist space. But actually, I don't encourage you guys to watch any of those manosphere influencer videos, but if you watch them, they're actually promoting so much more than just anti-feminist philosophies. The first thing they're mostly promoting is how to be successful. And when we're talking about things like provider and the downward economy, that stuff is damn compelling, right? So if you see Andrew Tate videos, he's like, I'm rich. Look at my car. Look at my house. Look at my clothes. He's always flashing status symbols, right? And then he's like, not only am I rich, being rich is going to solve all your problems. And I'm going to tell you how to be rich. That is so compelling for young men at the age of 18, 19, 20 to hear. And our data is actually showing some very difficult stuff as well. That, most of them are actually, I'll talk about the economic precarity actually in a little bit later. But the other part of it is that, when you're hearing something like this, that I'm rich and I'll tell you what to do, and you talk about, like, look at how good my body looks, right? Look at it's unattainable, it's unsustainable. They're consumerizing self-care. This stuff is very exciting to young men. Somebody just gave them a rule book or a guidebook to say, this is what it means to be a successful man. So they are absolutely internalizing some of it, but to understand that it's not all just misogyny. It's also harmful notions of masculinity, and that harms women and it harms men. Yeah. So I'll stop here for now.
Becky, what happens when all of these ideologies start shaping who is perceived to belong in leadership or caregiving roles? Because that's the other piece. We're trying to challenge who's caregiving, right? Challenge who's in leadership roles, but we're really seeing that what's happening to that when it's framed as a virtue or authenticity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really complicated because I'm with you with the let's just complicate everything.
Yeah.
Because some of the Tradwives we were looking at had, again, sort of biblical ideas, and we're following scripture around sort of who's supposed to be the leader, but other families had really complex ways that they negotiated the leadership within their family and sort of who took ownership for what. So for example, one family talked about how, he makes the decisions on everything that sort of affects him. Like, he makes the final decision on what truck we buy, but I make the final decision on what sewing machine we buy, right? Where other women had talked about, this intersects with some of the research we've been doing on femininity coaches, this idea that the naturalness of men's leadership, that women are therefore not as good of leaders. And some even tried to tie that to like biological cycles that, when you're in your luteal phase and this hormone is high, or when you're in your ovulation phase and this hormone is high, and, to try to justify why women are not good leaders. And then we also found that a fair portion of the women also talked about having some of their own mental health struggles, actually, and that decision making was really anxiety provoking. But then instead of seeing that as sort of a personal struggle, they identified that as like, see, I'm a woman, I don't like making decisions, rather than kind of seeing the connection to their own. They could simultaneously say they struggle with anxiety, but then say their concerns around decision making were about their womanhood and not about their anxiety. And so I think, I agree with this idea that we've been talking about, that it's not just this little manosphere or femisphere bubbles, but we're also seeing it proliferating and sort of merging with community. And even here on my radio station, I'm in Hawaii, and we are often kind of separated from continental trends and things like that. But our radio station guys were talking about whether or not they were high value men or not, that it's really like permeating a lot of how we think about men and women's roles in a variety of spaces, that we're just starting to wrap our minds around.
And this doesn't happen accidentally. This is engineered, monetized, and customized by algorithms. And they meet people at moments, in many cases, in vulnerability. So, Tavishi, who is engaging the most with these narratives? What draws them in? How do algorithms figure into everything? Help us understand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll explain the why, and I think that makes it clear who is engaging in it, right? And so we have data from all over the world. It's not a new concept, the idea of economic precarity. And economic precarity, by definition, is not about whether or not you make enough money. It is about the fact that you have a sense that your future financial stability is no longer a possibility. So it is immense sort of dread, uncertainty, and anxiety around your future financial prosperity. And so in the US, we have almost 75% of men, 76% more women, by the way, but who are saying that it's harder for my generation to be financially secure than my father's. And then more than half the men say the only way to make it is to get a job quickly, right? To get a job that makes you rich quickly, right? So that's the kind of stuff that as I was mentioning, if you're going to start saying things like, I know how to make you rich, come talk to me. And they've monetized it. Andrew Tate has e-learning courses, right? They have monetized it. And so this is again very compelling. And then when you have most people saying things like, oh, I have to be a provider, I need to find a way to become really rich very quickly, then of course the men who are endorsing these norms are more likely to be in the manosphere. Our research shows that men who endorse man box items, man box is basically rigid norms of masculinity, right? So if you're in the box, you believe in these rigid norms of masculinity. They're the ones who are online most to be understood, to express their frustration and anger, and to find a community. They are desperate for a space that sees them and understands them. So when you're asking me who's online, they're online. Mm-hmm. The reason why the algorithm sort of works really hand in hand shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, but basically all these platforms like X and Insta and TikTok are sort of prioritizing engagement and profit over content quality. And they don't distinguish between adult users and underage users, right? And so the more you have this kind of provocative, of course, the more you have this provocative content out there, the more likely, thank you, people are going to click on it. They're going to comment on it. They're going to, share it because it's driving engagement. And that's sort of what actually gets the algorithmic amplification. Researchers in UCL found that the TikTok's For You page shows a 4-fold increase in extremist content after 5 days. Debbie Ging found that young boys can be online watching neutral content. It takes 23 minutes for the algorithm to show you extremist content. 23 minutes. I was anecdotally in LA a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was just last week. Time-space continuum doesn't exist anymore. Recently, that's a good one. Recently, and a trans man was talking to me and said, I only watch very progressive queer rights videos on YouTube, and yet the recommended videos ticker shows me Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. I don't understand why the algorithm is not picking up that is not the kind of content I want to watch. So that is the level to which the algorithms play. And then, like you said, there's the money. The monetization pipelines work within this kind of virality system. And now we have a propulsion of all this manospheric content into mainstream men's everyday media diets. So we're in trouble.
Okay, let's turn ourselves to younger women encountering trad. I promise we're going to get to solutions, but I want us to open up because, again, from my perspective, this was a fringe outside of the workplace thing, and it will never seep in. And so I think it's important for us to understand the how, the why, the what, and then we can do the now what. So, Becky, how are younger women encountering tradwife content through irony, aspiration, or identity? What do you notice about what gains traction?
I think there's a variety of different routes. When we actually started studying the sort of everyday tradwives, we thought we were going to create categories or classes of tradwives. But the more we looked into them, the more we realized that there's so many different, like if you think of a Venn diagram, right, like overlapping bubbles that bring women into curiosity. Sometimes it's through the cooking, the clean with me videos, right, where people don't have a necessarily particular ideology that brings them to those spaces, but they find themselves there because of ASMR and watching somebody clean. And then in other cases, there's a really big overlap between how people are using the term tradwife and stay-at-home mom. That's interesting that they're merging over time. And then for some folks, again, it comes from an ideological perspective. But like we were just discussing, sometimes it's just through these completely innocent mechanisms, or even sometimes people that we think of maybe more on the liberal side of the spectrum of people who want to do more like slow living or who are granola and crunchy and want to get back to like raising their own food and raising their own animals and living off the grid. And so there's a variety of reasons that people can find tradwife content. And what we also noticed was, whenever they do the Google metrics and they give you can see the explosion of different search terms and things like that. Then in 2020, Tradwife really exploded. And then again, about a year ago, when the Ballerina Farms article came out. But when we actually started looking for people to be in our studies, using the hashtag Tradwife, searching for hashtag Tradwife or Tradlife, about half of the content is actually like snark content or critical commentary or, people poking fun at Tradwives, that it's easy to sort of look at the side of the internet that is engaging with it because people are interested in it. But there's literally almost 50% of the videos, I think it was like 45% or something like that, were commentaries about it or critical thinking around what this means, which I think is, inspirational, but can also again be another pathway into it. If you start watching the ones that are snark or critical commentary, it can also be a pathway in. And I have the same problem where we've been really diligent about opening, private windows as our browsers to do any of this research about Tradwives. We log out, we're not logged into Google accounts or anything like that when my GA and I have been working on these, and yet it still emerges in my feed, though that is not of interest to me personally, right? So I do think it's easy for people to find their way in, and it intersects with so many other communities that there isn't one just sort of clear pathway, but people can find it through a variety of doors.
All right, Kate, let's talk about the resistance or reimagination, please. Vive la résistance. Places where younger generations, speaking of, are reframing these ideas in a healthier or more constructive way. Please tell us everything. Yes.
Desperate. I have to tell you one more anecdotal, because when you said that to Vichy, my son is 11, spends a lot of time watching Minecraft YouTube. Yeah. I would say 90% of the ads that are targeted at him are ICE ads in English and in Spanish, encouraging him to report himself or his family if he thinks he's illegal. So if you have sons in your life who are hanging out in their bedrooms, do not assume that they're safe. We need to be engaged with their online lives and make sure we're having conversations all the time about what they're consuming. Okay, you asked me to get to the good news, so I'm sorry, I pulled you down and now I'm going to bring you back up. One of the things that I came up with was actually something that Becky mentioned, the humor. And I'm actually encouraged by the amount of criticism and humor. For every Nara Smith video that you see, do you all know Nara Smith? She's the one that whispers as she cooks. How do you make homemade sprinkles? For every Nara Smith video, there are hundreds of high school age boys who are saying, I'm making a homemade cupcake for my girlfriend. I'm going to roll out the sprinkles and I'm going to drive to Tibet and get some special dye they're very funny and they're very engaging, and I'm glad to see the snark. I think that's encouraging. I was talking to Dr. Crystal Duarte this morning, who's researching the backlash of Tradwives, and she says that the safety has come up. I think this was made very obvious during the Ballerina Farm article that came out in the New York Times, but women are starting to see, young women, wait a minute, if I don't have a job and I'm 100% dependent on someone else and I don't have any decision-making power in my house, that doesn't sound like a safe situation. So they're starting to think critically about, what is online. And a lot of this is media literacy. Teaching kids to understand that what they see on TikTok is not real life. It is edited, scripted, choreographed material. It's as good as watching a movie. And I think having media literacy conversations is really important. The third one is something that Tavishi just mentioned, which is, I think men who are sucked into the manosphere learn, oh, wait, you're just trying to sell me things. You don't care about me. You don't care about my loneliness. You're just trying to sell me testosterone supplements. And after I fork over so much money and I don't feel better about myself, maybe I'm going to pull back out. So that's where I'm seeing resistance, and it's encouraging.
My resistance was by wearing a June Cleaver dress inspired by my grandma's drapery. So there you go. It was a choice. On brand, thank you. So, what can leaders do? We're all I'm like, oh. So, let's take a sigh because I think we're going to get into solutions and talk about it at our tables because these narratives aren't going away and they're influencing real attitudes and choices. And so, what do we do in workplaces? Kate, let's go back to you. What do you think we should do when these narratives are shaping attitudes or team dynamics?
I think the number one power of these norms is that they are unspoken. And I think we can take their power away when we speak these norms out loud. And I think we can do that in our workplaces. Those fantastic ERGs that we heard all about in the last session, that's a great place to tackle norms. And I understand that the environment right now might not be conducive to a gender conversation, but when we talk about employee wellness, we can very naturally get to, let's make sure all of our male employees have access to caregiving and all of our female employees have access to leadership. When you talk about future of work and talking about hybrid situations and flexibility, you can get into gender norms. So I think that if you intentionally bring this into conversations and spaces, naming things out loud, having a conversation about it can debunk them very quickly.
I love that. Tavishi, what about supporting men in ways that encourage equality and care rather than reinforcing stereotypes? How do we break that silence?
I think, I mean, first of all, I don't think I can speak much about workplaces the way you all can. So I really appreciate, so I appreciate sort of learning a lot from you all today. One of the things I think that's really, really important is that we need to start seeing men as humans, right? And I think that I think when we say gender, right, we are evoking women, which is very, very important. But we also need to sort of understand that until and unless we don't actually start talking about men in the workplace as also humans, we're just going to reinforce the binary that feminists for decades have been trying to dismantle in the first place. So one is like perhaps even shifting language from gender equality, which is very hard for a feminist like me to say, but shifting it to more values that are human based and care based could actually bring men in. The other thing that we've been doing a lot is that, we are recognizing that in some ways we need to meet men where they're at. And so creating spaces, even in the workplace, that allows us to meet men where they're at, as opposed to expecting a transformational change to happen just because of one tiny, short-lived intervention, that's not going to happen. And then asking them to embody principles and values that they're not actually fully on board with is also not going to happen. So, and then the third thing that I think is really important is we often talk, we're an NGO, right? And so when we talk to sort of some of the corporate folks, they come and say, tell us the business model. What's our ROI in all of this? And so we have to sort of talk to them about how healthy masculinity actually has implications on talent retention. It has implications on morale. It has and it is a really hard business case to make, but we do need to do that. And then things like paternity leave. The US is a very kind of unique example in comparison to the rest of the world. You all know, right? Most of the industrialized countries do have paternity leave. The US doesn't. Even the countries that have paternity leave, so we did a study in the Nordic countries, and they have the best kind of policies at government level for paternity leave. And even there, men are not taking paternity leave 100%. So the Nordic Council of Ministers, God bless them, came into us and said, what is happening? Tell us why. What we are doing everything we can, and yet they're not taking up all the paternity leave they're offered. And what we found was, and these are the lessons we can learn at workplace, even if the government's not mandating it, what can employers do? It has to be 100% paid all through and through. You cannot say 3 months is 100% and the rest of it is 80%. The minute you say 80% or 70%, they're not going to take it. Households can't survive on 80% pay. Yeah. It has to be non-transferable. If it's transferable, I can promise you it's going to go to the spouse. right? Because there's a gender pay gap, women don't get paid as much. Men will say, hey, my paycheck is more, and women will say paychecks are more important, and women will take it. It has to be flexible because it's not like you have a baby, for all those who have babies here. It's not like you have a baby, the first 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever, you have a baby, it's done. Do you know how sick the baby gets for the first 2 years of their life? Do you know how much leave you need for the first 2 years of the baby's life? Even more, but like at least the first 2 years. So it's got to go into 24 months of the child's life. And these are some of the lessons we've learned from the best policies on paternity leave. And those can be, in whatever shape and form, at least sort of implemented at employer level. I think these are some really important things to do.
So true. And then, Becky, what about the counter narratives, whether online or in community settings, that could help some of our companies here frame inclusion more effectively?
Oh, this is probably my hardest question as a not business person. I apologize. Social work, right? So, I find it really fascinating. I mean, we talked about in the manosphere, there's these different sort of categories or identities, like the incels or the MGTOW folks. And we're seeing some of that in the women's spaces also, right? Where you have the stay-at-home girlfriends and the feminine coaches and the tradwives and um, the what is it called? The dark dating something. And it's some of the snark that has come out has also been one of my favorite ones. She has a title, it's called Cosplay for the Patriarchy, and that's her video about tradwives. And there's also mob wives, in case you guys did not know about that one. And how social media is helping us think about not just finding ourselves, but also crafting identities is something that we haven't quite, I think, wrapped our minds around, that people are looking for this, like, okay, if I want to be a mob wife, what do I want to have to do? If I want to be a trad wife, what do I have to do? Um, that, and there was the counter to the trad wife, there was the whole trend of like boss babes and hustle culture, right? And so if people are looking for these models of identity, I don't think we've wrapped our minds quite around what it would mean to present other models that are healthier models. I mean, maybe it's not as attractive to be like, I want to be a well-balanced person with a home life and work life. I don't know what, there's not a really catchy phrase for that, but like if anyone here wants to go market, like go find it and market it, you go. But we don't have models we have these extremes, right? And that's the nature of social media, is that's what gets views. But is there a way to start sort of countering that with more purposeful intent to offer other options? And just as a side note, a lot of the women inadvertently talked about the workplace, and they had like this catchphrase of like, even if my husband is sort of my boss, like, why would I go to work all day and work for 10 bosses when I can just work for one? And a lot of them were engaged in alternative forms of wage earning for their family, like their own businesses. They did Etsy. They had actually a handful of them were personal trainers, like things that they could schedule on their own and work around their family lives. So it's not that all of them wanted to be completely separated from bringing some kind of wage into the family, but that the flexibility, like having a primary identity as the stay-at-home parent, like that there's some hints there, I think, that we can all think about in where we still haven't met the needs of families, that having one partner who's regular job and then another partner who has a more flexible type of income stream is something that they were trying. And they were also, interestingly, very interested in blue collar lifestyles. So again, as another category, there's the gold digger category of women who are looking for generally, lawyers, doctors, business people who can give them a particular lifestyle. But a lot of the tradwives were very rejecting of that sort of idea of looking for in a gold digger idea of looking for a rich husband, doing things in the more service economy. They were more interested in, again, this kind of like almost fetishization, if that's the right conjugation, of blue collar men and labor that's very physical labor. And so what is that Venn diagram bubble tapping into that maybe we haven't thought about when they're thinking about the division of labor in their families?
I'll say because we work with over 100 global multinational member companies in my think tank. And what I see over and over again that's extremely effective is get leaders to tell their stories. So senior leaders are taking paternity leave. People are coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and they will do these intentional storytelling campaigns. If you don't have the budget to do this full, like get a marketing crew in, they just have blog posts, and they're incredibly powerful and effective, and then get up and do a Q&A. Those stories actually change what people can see can happen at a company. And I know probably many of the individuals here have run those kinds of campaigns. So I just can't stress that enough. Counter the narrative. So wrapping up before we get to your tables, let's close with an idea that people can walk away with. So what's one thing you want these leaders to understand about these narratives as they look ahead and plan for supporting their workforces? Let's go to you, Becky, first.
I think a big lesson for me with looking at the Tradwives was, as somebody who identifies as more liberal and more on the feminist side of the spectrum, there's a lot of shared concern about the place of women in the workforce. That there a lot of the women were identifying the impracticality, the demands on women. Like we already talked about, like the multiple shifts that women work in the workplace and in the home. And it really, I think, highlights the ways that we've come far, but that we still have room to make workplaces more conducive to families, not just women, not just men, but to families, to, personal lives. And so I hope that people don't dismiss what that some of these cultures online are showing us, right? And the commonalities that we share across ideological spectrums, that there's still work to be done to make workplaces more humane, and that they can, still do better at supporting all of us in both our personal lives and our professional lives.
Absolutely. Tavishi.
So we do a lot of work with young people. Well, I shouldn't say young because young adults, right? And so young men particularly. There is a shift in how they are seeing the world. And I'm not going to sort of evoke that kind of stereotypical Gen Z phenomena. Our data is showing that the way they think about relationships, the way they think about friendships, we have a sample of 2,000 people in the UK, 15%, that's 300, said they have AI girlfriends and boyfriends. Do you know how big that number is? Like, that just blew my mind. And so I think that there needs to be an effort made to sort of reinvent some of the existing practices to sort of take into account the very different realities that these young people are living, right? And they're going to come and be a part of the workforce. And so without a doubt, we need to think about how to make it more humane. But some of those older models of sort of how I identify as a millennial, and I don't even think I can think about what that means for the young people who are coming in, because it's such a different perspective. They want long-term relationships, but they're very pessimistic about love, right? They are sort of, their friends are now becoming their kind of companion networks. They turn to casual sex more often than not. Women are reporting they don't want children in the future. Men are saying they want children in the future. So really, it is a moment of such transition and shift that we really do need to sort of, as workplaces, lean in to say, frankly, we don't know squat. Let's figure out what is happening with them. What is it that they really want? Right? And maybe it is the ERGs and things that actually help us understand what they want. But to make an assumption that we already know what they want, I don't think that's going to serve any workplace in the future well.
All right, Kate.
I'm going to take that and give everyone a task, and I'm going to do it myself. The holidays are coming up. We're going to be with a lot of family. If you're ever in a house with a tween or a teen, don't say, "How's school?" Yeah. Good. And then walk away. Sit down next to him on the couch. Say, "What TikToks are you watching today?" Show me some Instagram reels you think are cool that you looked at today, and just listen to them. Listen to why they think they're cool. Ask some questions. Try to get at that. What are they thinking? And try to pull back, and instead of telling them, well, in my day, but listen to them, because oftentimes I think people are attracted to Tradwives because they're attracted to simplicity. They're attracted to a device-free life. They're not attracted to the misogyny of the manosphere. They're attracted to wealth and success when they grow up. So I would say use the holidays as a time to listen to the next generation, and they'll always share the TikToks that they love.
Oh my goodness. Well, let me just,
Sorry,
one more.
wanna
Yes.
ask them about let's see how many of y'all respond to 6, 7. Oh, look at that.
Yeah. I mean, I totally. Let me just have one final thought and then turn it over. Oh, yeah. You can Google it because it's there. But let me just give you one final thought before we go into table conversation, which is we actually have the answers. Because do you all remember the days when companies were leadership academies, the GE Academy on Leadership? We know, and there are certainly flaws in that, but companies actually can go back to those roots and create communities of learning and innovation and how to be a citizen of your company in the world. We've done it before. So that's just my little provocation for the people who are designing the systems to create future leaders. And for people who need it, we have the answers. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa for some table talk and Tradwives and Manospheres people. That was incredible. Thank you so much to my panelists.
Thank you all. I just wanted to end on something a little fun that's a little outside, but also for a lot of us, we aren't even aware of these concepts, and they are influencing this next generation and whatnot. I actually thought, oh, maybe we do have enough people. I was thinking maybe we do the table talk all together. What do you think of that? It's the end. I'm scared people are going to start leaving. What do you think, Jeff?
I love joint table talk.
Table talk.
Yeah.
So you got one? Okay. Or we have questions. So let me turn it over to Candace. I feel like we're missing a mic. Is there an extra mic? Oh, there it is. Can you do me a favor and go give it to Candace? And one thing while we're coming over to Candace that I wanted to mention, and I know Dr. Crystal Duarte, who's our research fellow here, has done some work on Tradwives. And one of the things she told me is that it's actually somewhat oxymoronic because a lot of these Tradwives are the breadwinners in their families and their husbands are their managers. So it sounds a little bit like a boss reversal. Leave you with that. Okay, Candace.
Great panel. I feel bad for the people who left because a lot of my friends said, oh, I have to go early. I'm going to miss this Manosphere Tradwives. It was super fun. So thank you for being on the panel. I did have a question. I'm going to use that TikTok tip during this week. But quick question, Dr. Kate. So what are you doing? You mentioned your kids are playing Minecraft and these messages are popping up. So how are you monitoring it? Are you actually sitting there watching it? Or are you taking their iPads and then going in and playing Minecraft yourself?
No, no one can do that. I mean, wait, no. He's not getting pop-ups while he's on Minecraft. He's watching YouTube videos about how to do things in Minecraft. We are realistic. We are busy. There's no way we can sit over our kids' shoulders and watch everything they do. But what I do try to do is at least once a week, just have a conversation. What ads are you seeing on YouTube? They go in cycles. During the election, it was all pro-Trump ads, and now it's very ICE-related ads. So it's not just the algorithms, it's also paid advertisement that's targeting boys. So I just think having conversations, show me the video, show me an ad. You know, it started with me because we were watching Netflix and an ICE ad came up and my son started saying it out loud. He had it memorized because he had seen it so many times. And I said, why do you know that? And he's like, oh, I see this YouTube commercial 10 times a day. That's what started my conversation. So I'm just giving you all the tip to have that with them and learn about what they're seeing.
Also, shout out to Candace asking a question. She's a rock star. Yay!
This is one of our esteemed board members. We love her.
So cool.
We also have a question from our online friends, Dr. Nancy DiTomasi. Is she unmuting herself or did she type it? No, she's here, Nancy. Awesome.
Hi, I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. I have some home responsibilities that made it impossible for me to be there. I wanted to raise an issue or make a connection that I don't think that we heard in the conversation. The notion of Tradwife and Manosphere, the way I understand it from what I've been reading, particularly Tia Levin's book, A Well-Trained Wife, talks about this as part of the Christian nationalist movement. And it's a very specific thing that is taught in a number of evangelical right-wing churches, such as, I think it's Doug Wilson from Idaho, Christ Church or something in Idaho is one of the leaders of this. And the way that she describes it, again, it's very specific, where the wives cannot work outside the home. Their responsibility is in the home to have families, to serve the men in the families, and so on and so forth. And so this is a very specific kind of movement, but it has been growing and having influence, particularly in evangelical churches that are right-wing and part of the Christian nationalist movement. But the link that I wanted to make is that sort of model of how families should work is really not that far away from the way that Claudia Golden from Harvard, who just recently won the Nobel Prize for her work on family and work issues, discusses that as long as organizations are especially greedy and demand more and more time from all of their employees, families that have, once they have children, and if men are making more money than women, families will decide to have men concentrate on their career and the wife essentially step back from the career responsibilities because for the family, it's more lucrative. And so it has a lot to do with what organizations are doing essentially to recreate this notion of a manosphere and Tradwives in an organizational context because of the way gender roles are played out with regard to family responsibilities and income inequality. So I wanted to raise that in the conversation.
We're thumbs up to that. There's lots of nodding heads on that one. And I would say return to work, return to office policies also are impacting. There's a lot of reasons why people want everyone back in the office, but it has a disproportionate impact on caregiving women.
And I think you were mentioning, I mean, the childcare costs,
Yeah.
right? They don't often meet the in the US particularly, right? They don't, how are you supposed to pay $2,500, $3,000? That was actually when I had a kid.
$2,500,
Yeah, sorry,
$3,000, I wish.
A decade ago, right? So anyways, yeah.
Insurance.
There was a study that just came out that I can't remember what the percentage, I heard it like a couple days ago, that for a decent portion of families in the United States, childcare is more expensive than rent.
Oh, yeah.
So that's good. And Dr. DiTommaso is a distinguished professor who recently retired, and we miss her dearly here at Rutgers Business School.